All right, so it's me, Andrew Kelly with the Kelly Young Voter Report, here with Mayor Steve Young of Benicia. How are you doing today, Steve?
I'm okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Awesome. So I guess getting right into it, there was a lot of controversy surrounding Valero's ad slash PAC spending in the
Yeah.
recent mayoral election, and a lot of this was centered around how it affected your campaign. What do you have to say about the Valero PAC and its effect on your run for mayor?
Um, Thank you. I think they actually helped my campaign.
Hmm.
Their advertising was so negative and so over the top that it was pretty easy to use that in a way that made people understand that that voting for me was not necessarily voting against Valero, but that,
Hmm.
if Valero was going to spend so much money to try to defeat me, that had to, I think it made people take a second look and try to
Hmm.
understand, who I was and what this was about. And because most of the campaign was a social media campaign because of the
Hmm.
pandemic, um, and they had run this same kind of campaign back in 2018 in the council race against Kerry Birdseye. Uh,
Hmm.
we were prepared for it, and we did not back away. And we sort of took the opportunity to sort of point out the real inconsistencies and, if not deceptive types of ads they were running.
Hmm.
And they were doing things that were easily disprovable,
Hmm.
photoshopping, trying to mess with photographs of me and taking
Hmm.
things out of context and trying to come up with uh, ways to make me look like I was completely out of the mainstream. And
Hmm.
I think that was, it was one of the things they ran was, well, don't vote for Steve because he doesn't care about you because he gets a pension. And it's like, yeah, okay, I get a pension, true. But, you know, so does every cop and every fireman and every teacher and every public employee. And so, are they trying to shame all of them or just me? And
Hmm.
I think that was an effective way to counter what they were doing.
Hmm.
And so I think that plus, I was able to raise enough money to put up some, a fair amount of social media ads, mostly on Facebook.
Hmm.
And those were effective, I think. And
Hmm.
the other thing I think that really helped was, they were strongly behind my opponent and building her up in a way that didn't necessarily help her. I think at the end of the day, she was like, you did me no favors because of the type of campaign they ran. And,
Hmm.
and so, and there were other things that I think added to my margin of victory. We had a really good sign campaign. We had, really our signs were very simple and easy to
Yes.
see. Hers were a little more hard to understand what they were really about. And
Hmm.
uh, so I think it was a combination of things. I had a lot of enthusiastic supporters.
Hmm.
Um, so I think Valero, I've had some talks with them, frankly, afterwards, and said that what they did was really counter to their own interests, that it hurt them, that it
Hmm.
created a rift in the community that started in
Right.
2018, and
Valero
I think they
arrest.
built on that. And it was not in their interest. Um, but they did it anyway, and so it remains to be seen what they're going to do in 2022.
Hmm.
I told them that it was, they'd be better off just staying out of our local elections, and
Hmm.
we have tried as much as we can to tighten our campaign finance ordinance, which is actually pretty strong to start with. But
Hmm.
the Citizens United thing says they can spend as
Yeah.
much as they want, and there's nothing you can do about it, and they're not required to tell the truth. And so we are limited in how we can
Mhm.
combat this kind of stuff. And so I think it's just a matter of trying to convince people and candidates, frankly, that they'd be better off not associating themselves and not being connected to that kind of a campaign in the future. But
Mhm.
we'll see how it turns out.
I see. So in essence, what you're saying is you feel like the negative campaigning from Valero and their associated PAC ended up helping you in the end
I do.
because the
Yeah.
excessive, I guess, negative tone of it drew people to your side out of,
Right. I think Benicia voters really reacted strongly against that type of campaigning. And,
Mhm.
hopefully that will carry over and they will change how they uh, interact with the community going forward.
I see. And I guess because you mentioned Citizens United, which is perfect because I actually wanted to ask, what would you say the recent mayoral election you were in, that you obviously won, um, taught you about our campaign finance laws as a country?
Well, clearly, I think Citizens United has been a disaster
Mm.
for democracy. And
Indeed.
the idea that corporations are the same as people and that money equals speech um, runs counter, I think, to most people's understanding of how democracy is supposed to work. And so the idea that a corporation as big as Valero or big corporations in general can spend unlimited amounts of money. It was usual, uh, I think, to see this in obviously in national elections, but to see it happen on a local level was a wake up call, I think, for a lot of people. They didn't, this is not the way typically elections are held on a local level where an outside corporation or, they are located here. Sure, they've got an interest here, but it was part of the oil industry in general has adopted this kind of campaigning and
Mhm.
tried to get involved in local elections. There
Mhm.
was there was a one where the mayor of Petaluma who was opposed by the oil industry, and you think, well, what Petaluma? What do they have to do with the oil industry? Well,
Mhm.
it turns out that she sat on the air district board, and the air district, of course, has regulatory powers over um, refineries. And so they didn't like the way she voted on some of her air district votes. And so they were set on taking her out with the hope that they'd get somebody more friendly on
Mhm.
the air district board. And that's just,
Mhm.
now you're inserting yourself in elections where you have no other interest. Petaluma doesn't have a refinery. They don't have any, connection really to the oil industry other than that the oil industry did not like the vote that their mayor took, and so they were willing to spend big to take her out. So I
It
think it's
really seems
yeah,
almost spiteful in a way.
well, it's just using your power to try to insert yourself in local elections.
Mhm.
Um, you know, Before Citizens United, obviously, the local elections were decided by local voters, and that's the way it still should be. And when you allow corporations to spend, I mean, they spent $300,000 in the mayor's race. And we
Mhm.
are limited under our own campaign ordinance to spend no more than $34,000. So
Mhm.
they could, outspend me almost 10 to 1, and they did. Uh, and so, you can't compete financially with that. So
No.
you have to try to turn it around and say, why are they spending $300,000 to defeat me? What is their
Mhm.
interest in
Mhm.
pushing my opponent or defeating me?
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
I just keep sort of pounding that question over and over again,
Mhm.
I think a lot of people, it gets through.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, indeed. So I guess shifting gears a bit, as we know, this past summer, George Floyd was extradited extradited extradited
He was murdered. Let's put it.
murdered by a police officer. And I guess given that Gen Z is projected to be the first majority minority generation in US history, and as such adverse affected by acts of police violence. Are there any reforms or funding adjustments the mayor's office is considering with regards to BPD? And if so, would you care to tell us about them?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think people need to understand that as mayor, I'm just one of 5 council members. And I
Right,
don't have any
right,
specific extra powers. I don't set the budget. I don't
right,
set policy. The council does that. But the
right.
council did.
And I guess I should clarify, what I'm asking is more along the lines of, is there anything the mayor's office is considering proposing to the council for the council to vote on?
Right. So last year, there was a effort put forth by the then police chief, now city manager, Eric Upson, to create a position of a racial equity manager
Mhm,
and create and to look at doing a study that looked at various aspects connected to equity issues and racial issues within the city government itself and within Benicia at large, and the creation of a commission to
mhm,
talk about these things. All of those things passed. I supported all of those things.
mhm,
They passed 4-1. The only thing that a mayor, actually the extra power that a mayor has is to make appointments to city boards and commissions.
mhm.
And if you look at the makeup of our city boards and commissions, they are largely older white people. And that's been the way that, the city has sort of been run forever. And so one of the things that was important to me and that I talked about in my campaign was the need to diversify our boards and commissions.
Mhm.
Because for a lot of people, that's, if they have political ambitions themselves, that's sort of the way they, sort of work their way up the chain, the way they sort of get involved in city government.
Mhm.
So I have tried to make appointments that reflect the diversity of the community. Um,
Mhm.
some of those were, but my appointments have to be ratified by the whole
Obviously
council.
ratified by the council, right?
Right. And so my first efforts, 3 of them were rejected uh,
Mhm.
by the council majority. And I was, upset about that. I thought it was, sort of counter to at least my goal of trying to get younger and more diverse.
Mhm.
So that's it's going to be an ongoing struggle
Mhm.
and try to make that point clear to everybody that, but 2 of those appointments have now been, the appointment subcommittee has actually reversed themselves and are now recommending 2 of the
Mhm.
appointments. And
Mhm.
so they will be made on April 6th. And that's really the only thing that I, as mayor, have any influence over as who I
Right.
nominate.
And
Uh,
so you're using your influence, you're trying, right?
yeah, it's somewhat limited, that people seem to think that, mayors have more power than they
Right.
do.
Mhm.
This is not a strong mayor city,
Right.
it's a council manager city. Though, even though the mayor is a directly elected position that serves for 4 years, a lot of cities rotate that among the council members, so everybody can say
Mhm.
they were mayor for a year or whatever.
Mhm.
Benicia actually has a, direct election, so I'm going to be mayor for 4 years.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
but it's it's a challenge always because you're always trying to cobble together 3 votes and see if you can
Right.
get support for
Right.
something you're interested in. And it's a challenge in this community. This particular council isn't necessarily probably as progressive as I am, and
Mhm.
um,
Mhm.
they don't share the same
Valid.
goals and values. But that's fine. That's who the voters selected, and there'll be
Indeed.
another election in 22, and so there'll
Mhm.
be another opportunity for perhaps some turnover on the council. And
Mhm.
so I'm remaining patient and just trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do what I can.
What I'm hearing is you are using all the influence you have as a mayor to sort of influence the city or town in a more equitable way.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure people see me as too active on this kind of stuff because
Mhm.
one of the things I think that's different about me is that I have been active on social media for a long
Mhm.
time, and
Indeed.
and most politicians are advised, do not do this. Stay far
Right.
away from it. Nothing good can come of being on social media.
Hmm.
That has been the, up until I was elected, you wouldn't find anybody on the city council who would go on social media or react. And because I was sort of willing to go the other direction and ignore the advice of the, quote, professionals, I think it did establish me as somebody who was more open to dialogue, more transparent, more willing to engage with the community. And I think that served me well. And so now, because I won and I won handily, there are at least one other councilman who has, I think, seen the light and is out there on social media a lot more than he had been before. We're not necessarily coming from the same perspective, but I always think it's good for politicians to be out there in public, and social media is where it's at in terms of engaging with the community. It's no longer the case where people are going to show up at council meetings even before the pandemic. You would, depending on the topic, if it was crude by rail or cannabis or controversial issues, you'd get a lot of people showing up, but that was still only 150, 200 people. Yeah, it's a lot of people in a room, but there are
a lot more than that.
There are 20,000 voters in this town.
Right.
And so I think that's one thing I think that's important for politicians in general to do. But it's a minefield, as anybody who goes on social media knows. You'll get a lot of haters for whatever you say, and you got to have a thick skin and be willing to just sort of say what you believe. And my philosophy has always been, I'm going to say what I think is right and accurate. And if you don't like it, don't vote for me. It's simple enough. And so, but enough people, I think, do appreciate the fact that I'm willing to talk about city issues and respond and get into dialogue with people. So I'm not sure the city council likes it or the city manager likes it, but I think it's an important thing to be doing. And I think the city should be doing more of it, frankly.
I see. I guess my next question would be another question or another issue affecting a lot of young people is the price of housing in the Bay Area has become very high for most people in recent years. Are there any plans on either the part of the mayor's office, the council, or the city manager to increase the supply of housing, especially affordable housing in Benicia?
We just had a long meeting last night about this particular topic. It was 4 or 5 hours on the topic, and not too many people I don't know how many tuned in to watch, probably not too many because there wasn't any discussion on social media today about it. But the state of California is putting a lot of pressure on cities to increase housing production, particularly affordable housing. And there is something called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, which is a process where the state gives sort of I don't know if quote is the right word, but sort of a goal for each city on how many units they are supposed to not produce, but make sure that they've got land available so that housing can be built. One of the challenges is that a lot of cities, including Benicia, are primarily single family. And that's, as you say, in Benicia, as well as the rest of California, single family housing is pretty expensive and out of the reach of most people. And so the need for affordable housing is obvious and evident. The state is telling us that we're going to have to allow for up to over 700 units of housing, most of which would be low and very low and moderate income housing. So just last night, for example, one of the topics that we talked about was the city-owned lot on East 2nd and East E, which is now sort of a parking lot, an overflow parking lot, that isn't really being used for anything beyond that. And what should the city do with it? And originally, 2 years ago, the council said, well, maybe a hotel, because hotels generate revenue and taxes for cities. Now, last night, there was a shift, And we sort of unanimously said, no, we don't want to do a parking lot. We don't want to do a hotel. We want to do housing.
Mhm.
And so great. But then the discussion is what kind of housing? And should it be all affordable or should it be market rate?
Mhm.
And I was pushing for all affordable because,
Mhm.
we could put maybe 50 units on there, and 50 units is not a small number.
Mhm.
And I was actually pushing for senior housing
Mhm.
because seniors, one of the problems that we have is that a lot of seniors in Benicia are house rich but cash poor. They
Mhm.
live in houses that are two-story houses, closer to downtown. They're getting older. They don't want to deal with a two-story house anymore and the stairs and everything.
Mhm.
So they would like to move into a single level unit, but not necessarily leave Benicia because they love Benicia.
Mhm.
So if we were to have a senior project somewhere, that would give a place for these people to go to and at the same time open up their houses for families. Uh,
Mhm.
but the majority of the council didn't want to go with that. They decided to go with primarily a market rate approach,
Mhm.
which would be and ownership as well.
Mhm.
So condos or townhouses as opposed to apartments for seniors, and at maybe 20% affordable instead of 100% affordable.
Mhm.
It's going to be hard to pull off, frankly. I'm not sure that you're going to find a developer who's willing to build. I mean, if it was pure 100% market rate, sure, you'd find lots of people willing to build those. But
Mhm.
because it's city owned, there's a state law that says you have to first offer it to affordable housing developers. And,
Mhm.
and so we will. And
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see if any affordable housing developers is willing to build a,
Mhm.
a market rate project or primarily market rate project of townhouses or
Mhm.
condos, ownership stuff.
Mhm.
We'll see if that works out. I'm a little skeptical myself, but in general, we're going to have to look at lots of different places in the community where housing could be constructed and hasn't been before. And there aren't a lot of places, but one of the things we're looking at as well, there's some open space, for example, up on Hastings and Southampton. There's a open space there across from Club Pacifica,
Mhm.
where right now it's just sort of used for campaign signs and nothing else. It's open space, but the city owns it. So could we convert that to housing, to
Mhm.
multifamily housing? It's close to Rayleigh's, it's close to schools, it's close to the freeway. It's a good location for
Mhm.
that kind of stuff. So I think the city has to be willing to uh,
Mhm.
rethink our typical development stuff and be willing to go
Mhm.
beyond primarily single family housing and look at
Mhm.
multifamily housing, because that's the only kind of housing that's going to be affordable. It's got
Right.
to multifamily, it's got to be rental. And I spent my career when I was working in sort of in this field, working in local government, doing affordable housing projects. So I know a little something about what it takes to put these things together. And I know it's going to be hugely controversial. And I know that a lot of people in the community are going to get upset by anything that,
Like,
A, is change, and
yeah.
B, is change that is going to bring in lower income people
Right. Right.
and families. So you're going to, it's going to be an uphill battle for sure. And
Mhm.
it'll be interesting to see how committed we remain. So far, I think we're certainly talking the talk. Are we going to walk the walk? That
Mhm.
we'll find out. Uh,
Indeed. Mhm.
but we're under pressure from the state to get this done. So
Right. Right.
I
And oh, go ahead.
no, that's all.
Oh, and I guess my last question, circling back around, you made climate change a central focus of your mayoral campaign. To that regard, what changes on a city level has the mayor's office, the city manager, and the city council done to sort of prepare the city better for climate change and I guess n- avert the worst of it as well?
Well, I got to give credit to Mayor Patterson, the former mayor. She was very big on climate issues, and she's really the
Mhm.
person most responsible for our climate action plan and being
Mhm.
sort of ahead of the game on a
Mhm.
lot of these issues.
Mhm.
Um, but in direct response to your question, uh, I think there are a couple things that the city needs to be looking at, and
Mhm.
one of them I think has to do with water availability and the drought. I think
Mhm.
climate change means we're going to see droughts, extended droughts, mega droughts. The state already is saying we're in a mega drought right now,
Mm.
which a lot of people are not necessarily understanding or accepting.
Mhm.
And if we're going to build another 700 units of housing, where's the water going to come from? Benicia's in a sort of a strange place in that we do not, because we're on the bay and on the straits, we don't have groundwater. So a
Mhm.
lot of cities in Solano County, for example, Fairfield or Vacaville or up, places up county, they
Mhm.
can just drill and pull groundwater up as a source of water.
Mhm.
We don't have any groundwater. We don't have that option.
Mhm.
So the water we get comes from the state and from it's something called the State Water Project, which is it's a situation where we have to pay the state for a fixed amount of water,
Mhm.
but they don't have to necessarily deliver that fixed amount of water.
Mhm.
So, for example, you pay for 100% of the water you want, and
Mhm.
they this year may give us 10 or 15% of
Mhm.
what we have paid for.
Mhm.
But if you don't pay for 100%, they cut you off. You're
Mhm.
out.
Mhm.
So that's sort of a screwed up deal. Um, so the the part of the conversation about affordable housing is where are you going to put it? Um, and is the Sino property, the 512 acres up off of Lake Herman Road, which is in the city and undeveloped,
Mhm.
should we be looking at that for additional housing?
Mhm.
And I think ultimately we're going to have to. But my concern is, well, I got a lot of concerns generally, but in terms of the environmental question you asked, where's the water going to come from
Mhm.
for this? And there is a idea that is it's not unique to Benicia, but the idea of recycling water.
Mhm.
And so there's an idea that the public works director is um, behind that basically says right now all of our wastewater goes
Mhm.
to the wastewater treatment plant, is treated, the solids are removed, you treat the rest, and then you dump it into the straits. That's what we do.
Mhm.
This idea is, okay, you send it to the wastewater treatment plant, you remove the solids, you treat it again, and
Mhm.
then instead of dumping it in the straits, you pipe it up to
Mhm.
Lake Herman. Lake Herman is where it's sort of our reservoir for water. You take that
Mhm.
water and mix it
Mhm.
with the other raw water that's sitting in Lake Herman, and that comes in from Lake Berryessa, and then send that water to the water treatment plant and treat it again. Uh, and if you do that, if we were able to pull this off, we would get into a situation where ultimately we are self-sufficient when it comes to water. We would
Mhm.
be recycling 2 million gallons a day and,
Mhm.
and reusing it. And it's going to be a PR challenge to convince people that the water that goes down the toilet can be cleaned
Mhm.
to a degree that it makes it drinkable.
Mhm.
The other thing is, though, that half of our water, no, actually 60% of our water goes to
Mhm.
Valero. We have a contract with them
Mhm.
where we send them many millions of gallons of water, raw water, not treated water, but still water, it's city water.
Mhm.
And they need that for cooling their towers and part of their oil refining process.
Mhm.
So we need them to sort of buy into this idea. And so
Mhm.
I've been having conversations with the general manager of Valero about this
Mhm.
for a while now.
Mhm.
And hopefully we have a contract with them that runs another 7 or 8 years.
Mhm.
Um, but they understand, I believe, that
Mhm.
water is a finite resource, and in a drought situation, we may be having less and less of it. And if it comes down to it, we're going to serve our customers, our citizens first before we serve them. But
Hmm.
they need an assurance that they're going to have water all the time if they're going to operate. And so, it's in their interest that something like this happen too.
Hmm.
And so, can we get them to pay for part of it? Will they? What they say now is, well, it's a bad time. For the oil industry, the pandemic, sales are down, profits are down. We're not going to commit money now, but they're not closing the door on it either.
Hmm.
So I think that would be a huge thing for this
Hmm.
community, if we could do such a thing. And the other environmental thing we've done recently is approve a big solar farm
Hmm.
out off of Lake Herman Road, 80 acres, which is sizable.
Hmm.
And that was surprisingly more. When I first heard about it and read the report about it, I thought this is a no-brainer. I mean, who's
Hmm.
going to be against solar?
Hmm.
But actually, some environmentalists were against it because it was technically in the open space area. Anything north of Lake Herman Road is
Right.
technically open space.
Hmm.
This was right off of Lake Herman Road, and it didn't require any water or roads or urban services, which is typically the thing you look at when you decide what qualifies as development, and it's
Hmm.
those kind of things. So if we didn't have those kind of things, I was comfortable saying that even in an open space area, we should allow solar. And so that ultimately carried the day. But should we be doing more solar? Should we be looking at wind projects? And then the other thing that I've been pushing is trying to move our fleet to all electric.
Hmm.
And so we did pass a policy that says when the city looks to replace a vehicle, they will look first at an electric vehicle. Now,
Hmm.
electric vehicles are more expensive, but in the long run, they're probably cheaper to maintain and operate going forward. And so, whether the police department, whether they can find a car that has enough range and enough speed to do police work, whether Public Works can find dump trucks or graders or large pieces of, heavier
Hmm.
vehicles that'll work for them. That sort of depends on the industry,
Hmm.
continuing to mature and come up with these kinds of things. But it's happening. You see BMW putting out electric trucks now.
Right.
So there are, we're moving in that direction, but it's a challenge for sure.
Hmm. Indeed. All right. Thank you so much for coming on.
Sure.
Love to have you again sometime if you would
Anytime, Andrew.
anytime. All right. Thank you so much.
And then where do you think this is where are you gonna post this or run this? Just on your own podcast?
Um,